Today we're painting this. What up friends, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. Continuing my trend of doing loose watercolor paintings, I painted this scene today. I recorded everything. I'm quite pleased with how it turned out. I think I did a good job in abstracting and making things a little simpler to understand, and I really feel like there's a lot of value in easing up on the eyes of the viewer and really letting them see the information that's actually important to convey the story or the atmosphere or the mood or anything like that, okay? So if you're ready, let's get started with the painting process of this. Okay, so I'm starting by doing something a little different here. I decided to mix all primaries to create this kind of a grayish color for the sky. And this basically has French ultramarine. It has some burnt sienna in it, I believe, and some new gamboge. Some of my standard paints, I think. I'm gonna close the window because someone's making a lot of noise outside. So anyway, yeah. My goal here is to get an initial wash that lets kind of the trees on the right and the skies to mix together, blend together. While leaving the roof for a moment, the roofs of all of the buildings for a few moments, because I do want to go back to them in a while, but first I have to take care of that foliage on the right. It's funny because I'm experimenting with so many new things right now that it's really just a big challenge of I have nothing to grasp onto basically because everything is new for me now. And the new approaches I'm taking. For this green I'm using, I believe it's undersea green, so I didn't really mix the primaries or something like this. I just simply used the undersea green as it is. I just find that it works really well in many of the combinations I'm already using. It just fits in naturally. I think because it has some, I'm not sure, I need to check that, but maybe because it has some French ultramarine in it, then it just works kind of well. So it could be that. So with any mixture with French ultramarine, it looks kind of okay. Now you see I'm trying to loosely paint around and I left some sharp edges. This is something I have like really good brush technique days and then it's sort of like a good or bad hair day. So some days I'm really good with the brush and I have good control over it, and some days I just don't have it in me. It's very interesting. This was one of the more challenging days I had actually. Things weren't really working the way I wanted in terms of the brush strokes. It's not that critical. I mean, I see a lot of people that have this sort of a loose work style with the brush, and they still get a nice result and something that turns out the way they want. So my idea here is basically to cover as quickly as possible all of those buildings while negative painting and going down to the dock while negative painting around the details of some of the boats so that I can leave them as a highlight for later on. This building that I'm going to get to in a moment on the right is actually very light, so its wall is practically white, so I'm going to leave it white, and the shadow on the right side is very blue. So what I'm doing now is I'm stopping here, going over the rest of the roofs, but I will be back for a moment to add some blue to it because if you look at the reference as well, you will see when it pops that it is quite blue. I'll put a link in the description box so you can see this. I believe I'll put a link to the reference. I don't remember. I think I may have lost it, so if I don't, apologies for that. So anyway, yeah, I'm continuing because the main priority is to keep the wash even, so I'm starting at the top where it can dry because of the green. And now I will move downwards with some blue. Now the cool part is that this blue, I can actually use it and continue connecting it to the bottom of the street and dock because that's kind of the color I recognize there. Now I also need to take care of this shadow of this house. So yeah, I think the highlight I left here is a bit too strong, so I'm not sure I should have gone that route. Maybe I should have covered everything with an initial wash and then have the walls not completely white. But I later on alleviate that by actually coloring the walls of the houses in yellow or something like this, so it does end up working fine. So anyway, I'm moving on with this wash, and for the building on the right, I'm mixing some yellows or kind of oranges because this is what I remember the color was. First off, I need to take care of that blue area as well. Maybe I'll color the yellow one later on, I don't remember, so yeah. So now I'm starting to negative paint around some of the details of the boats. I will admit this was a rather challenging part, and I'm not sure my tactic for doing it was necessarily right. Maybe there are better ways of doing this, but I kind of liked the idea of leaving some gaps for the details. Also, I did have the thought in my mind that maybe I will use a white gel pen this time, which I normally don't use, so you will get to see this later on. So anyway, now I'm covering the entire left of the entire part that's left of the dock, and moving downwards with the water. Okay, so for the water, I'm adding a bit of phthalo blue. You'll see in a moment. Now there were a few shadows on the boat that I did want to get at this point already, and yeah, now connecting the wall with the wash of some of the shadows of the boats, as well as the start or the beginning of the water of the watery area. And now I'm bringing into that mixture some more blue, some more phthalo blue, as I said, just to give it a bit of a sense of depth actually, and just to make it feel more like water. I find that it helps. Sometimes maybe even adding green, which is not something I do quite enough. I do want to do that a little more, adding some more colors into the water, and thus helping create a better sense of distance. So yeah. Now I'm adding a bit of a darker color into the already existing wet wash, and the reason why is that it is in fact darker, and it will also help me better define the shapes of the sort of reflections of the boats on the water. Because those boats are white, then the reflections are relatively bright as well. So you see I'm kind of coloring around them, trying to leave some room for those sort of reflections in the water, which will end up being the center of attention of this picture, which is the one thing that I did get quite well, quite nicely with this one, okay? There are a few things I would improve definitely, especially in the background or middle ground, but the foreground here really works, I think, and you will see this becomes more well defined as we move on with the painting process, okay? So now we're moving on to the roofs themselves. Now, my main concern or goal with the roofs is just to create a better separation with the sky, because all of the buildings in the reference were significantly darker than the sky value, and here there's still not enough of a differentiation. And what I will try is already at the same go to get the shadows on the roofs as well. So for example, this one I'm using this value, but for the right part of the structure, not just the roof, I'm gonna add a darker value, as you'll see in a moment. You can see here that my brush strokes are a bit, I messed up a bit, but that's okay. I'm not worried too much about it, mainly because it's not the center of attention or main area of focus, so you can get away with some mistakes. By the way, my nose is a little blocked, so sorry if my voice sounds a little weird today. So anyway, now I'm adding that shadow that I told you about, really, really rich and dark. For this I'm using French ultramarine and sepia. Usually if I want to get it to look a little deeper, I use sepia, not burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is good for sort of the grays together with the French ultramarine, but if you want to get the rich darks, usually I'll use sepia. But sometimes I tend to overuse it, which can hurt the feeling of the painting, and I think it did hurt maybe just a bit with this one, but that's okay. So now I'm changing back to a lighter value just for this roof, and I'm gonna let it mix a bit, that's fine. There's no way around it actually. It's the good idea here is to let stuff mix around, so that's good. Well, I did create a small separation, I didn't remember that, on the left between the dark area and this additional roof. I don't like these kinds of separations and fragmentation like I talk about quite often. But yeah, that's just part of it. It sometimes happens, and that's okay. Coincidentally,
what I find funny is that I see a lot of really experienced artists that do have that sort of fragmented look, but because their drawing is so accurate and the values are so good, it's barely noticeable. So that's very inspiring actually, and I feel like when I get fragmented, it doesn't look that sounds bad. It doesn't look that good. I'm not able to preserve some of the accuracy that I want. So now I'm going in and adding some shadows, deeper shadows to this side because it just felt right. The thing is, I went a little too dark with this. I think I should have definitely kept it a little lighter because the walls are lighter than the roofs. But anyway, yeah. So now I'm covering again this right side of the roof just to create some more shadows for this one. And you can see how it helps define the shape of the building. Now you can actually recognize it as something. It's not all blended together with the trees in the background or with the sky. It really brings it out. And with the first wash, you almost never bring things out unless you have a very specific way of working. For me, it's just putting the paint on the paper and just filling up the most of the paper, except for the highlights maybe. So yeah, so this is the stage for doing that. Now I'm adding, I'm actually using a very similar mixture of French ultramarine and sepia to add the shadows to the trees. Maybe I added a bit of sap green there, or not sap green, undersea green like the previous layer. One important thing is I think to not do the second layer with the same color you did the first, unless there is a specific purpose for that, maybe increasing the vibrancy or depending on the brand you use like Sennelier. But generally speaking, it's better if you can shade with colors that are a bit different from the previous layer, from the previous wash. Now it doesn't look like this here. When I put this paint, it looks green, but the thing is it looks green because of the under layer, okay? So even if I'm gonna glaze with the blue or dark blue on top of the green, it will change it a bit, of course, but for the most part it will still look green. Now what I did was add a bit of quinacridone rose, I think, to the mixture, or magenta, just to make it a little stronger on the right. It does warm it up a bit, but that's barely noticeable. It's more just to give it some strength. Okay, so you can definitely see the difference here. Some strength and variety, which I think I got pretty well in there. On the left you have this sort of dots of leaves and things like this. On the middle you have these lines, and on the right you have this big darker chunk of trees. So it gives this sort of an impression of more elaborate background when it shouldn't be that elaborate, of course. So you just hint at it. Now from here, I have a few things that I need to work on in terms of the buildings. I also need to significantly darker the bottom dock area, and I also need to bring out some of the darkest darks near the boats. So now I'm just adding some yellow to that building here on the right. I will use the very same mixture to add some yellow to some of the houses on the left that I feel like were too white, but I will leave the one on the very left white because I just think it's a good way of connecting the foreground with the mid-ground, maybe middle ground. So yeah, for this one it's kind of a mix of New Gamboge and some other paints that were just left over on the palette. So you can see on the one hand that the color itself doesn't necessarily matter this much, but you can see that because I was a bit forgiving for myself in terms of the colors I used, they aren't really harmonious with this one. I don't feel like. They may convey some atmosphere, some maybe cool or coldness, but they don't really work harmoniously necessarily, which is something I do try to achieve. But yeah, so anyway, now I'm working on those deep shadows in the water, things like this. You can see already that I have this sort of a indication of the reflections of the boats, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to put this additional wash without ruining what I already have. So this is important. I am a bit timid with the brush, and it shows a bit. I would have drawn these lines much more fast, I think, if I was more aware that I'm doing it. But anyway, yeah, that happens sometimes too. I told you, bad brush stroke techniques day, so it happens. So now I'm trying to not overwork the reflections, so just using a few lines to negative paint around them. Now I'm putting in some darker darks in that area because there's a very heavy shadow on the wall itself. and right next to the boat, and I do want to get that strong point of contrast because it's the center of attention of the painting. Okay, so this is where you actually need to get that in. Now there is a dark line just under the boats, even where the reflection is. This is actually because there is a stripe, a black stripe on the boat that I will get in a few moments, so you will better understand this. So now again, getting in those in between reflections area, sort of on the verge of overworking it. I don't know why I used so many weird strokes for that. This one is really a mess up, but that's okay. As long as the overall impression is there, it's fine, and you'll see it will connect. So sometimes you need to really have faith in the painting and that it will pull itself together as long as you add things that correct previous mistakes and improve upon previous mistakes and maybe add some new elements there. So yeah. So again, now darkening. Probably should have kept the left area a little lighter, but I believe I covered that one as well. So yeah, and I'm using here a sort of a mix between French ultramarine and phthalo blue. So I'm using sort of a cool blue and a warm blue, and it because of that it kind of grays out the interaction between them. So you get a very cold gray, sort of deep blue. Well, it's not gray. It's not very gray, I would say, but it has some grayness to it. And now I just felt like I wanted to light it up and make it look more wet. So I just intuitively decided to splash some water in there. I'm not sure if it was the right choice. I'm doing it again in a moment now. I'm just putting the brush in clear water and putting it in there. Just thought I'd test that out to see what will happen. It's funny because I can really micro-analyze every step of this painting, but I do want it to be clear that it doesn't detract from how pleased I am with it. I could probably analyze a lot of paintings that are great, even not by me, and still notice a lot of technical stuff, but it still doesn't mean I don't like them. Okay, for this boat I added French ultramarine on the left, and then this red piece of I think it's Pyrrole Scarlet. The French ultramarine makes a good distinction, and you can see the difference between the boat on the left and the water. It just helps to establish the color of that boat on the left. It's different from the water. Now I'm using a very similar mix of French ultramarine, maybe with a bit of burnt sienna or some leftover things that graded out just a little bit for the shadows, okay? And on top of those I'm going to add some red, because this is what I saw in the boats, in some boats. In this doc and in other references I was looking at, it's just, I saw it as a common theme. And I just love the way the red and blue sort of mix together. I will see this in just a moment. I did, looking back at this, it does remind me that Alvaro Castanet, for example, does a lot of this sort of reds and blues together where the center of attention is, because it creates a very strong contrast, not just necessarily a value contrast, and sometimes not even a value contrast, but more of a temperature contrast. So I didn't really think about it at the time, but it was a good idea. Now you can see how the red bleeds differently on the right and on the left, depending on the level of wetness and what I put first, because on the left I put the blue and then the red, and on the right I put the red and then the blue. So all of these things make a difference. And it's these kinds of nuances that you really need to control if you want to produce good work. And sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't, but I'm aware of when I don't get it, and I usually have a general idea of what I should do to improve. So it's a good thing. Now I added again some more shadows on the boats, as you saw. Now I'm doing the same thing for some of the boats on the left, adding some of the details of the cabin or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's just this sort of a small space that you can store stuff depending on the boat. We do have some more of the details to get in there, like the mast, and or I don't even know if it would be called officially a mast, because they're rather small and short, because it's small sort of boats. And then we have all the ropes and things like this. So now I'm making a darker mixture just to get those details in there, like the ropes and everything I just mentioned. Using the kind of French ultramarine and burnt sienna again, but a very thick mixture. And you see I put some of the windows there wet and wet into the cabin to keep them a little blended. And so this pushes these boats on the left so that they're not competing too much with the ones on the right, which is okay. They can compete a little because they're still in the foreground, but just not too much. So again, adding in all those ropes and the mast and sort of different parts of the boats. Trying to work with the highlights I already left as much as possible, but that's not always possible. So I will add, as I mentioned, a bit of touches, a bit of just touches of white. Yes. Now the shadows on the right are still wet, I believe, and while they're wet, I can put in the windows, but I'm not sure I'm doing it. So yeah, now I'm adding that same dark mixture to add some details to the boats. They had like this black stripes running along them, and you can see how this really helps make their shape work. Just makes them feel more believable and differentiated from the water. And now it's okay. It doesn't look like an outline or anything like that. It doesn't look like I literally try to draw the boats with watercolor. It actually works because it's just read as a strong point of contrast, which is what I wanted here. Some more of the details, and now I'm putting in the windows, and it's still a bit wet, and I wouldn't say I got lucky because I knew it, but I didn't plan ahead. I just thought, this is a good time to put in the windows, and then I realized that it's also great timing in terms of the water on the paper being a little dry, but not completely dry, and so the windows didn't spread too much, which is something you want to make sure doesn't happen when you're doing wet and wet, if you still want to have some control. Now there's this another detail in the back of this boat, and I wasn't sure what it is. It looks like some metal bars moving around it or something like this. I should have continued the darkening of the second boat behind it, because it's not like a white thing attached to the back of the boat. It's actually just a few metal, maybe a metal fence or something like this. So anyway, yeah. Now there isn't an awful lot to do. Just to get some better indication of the shape on those boats on the left, which I'm doing right now, especially with the water under them, which I will add some more to, as you'll see in a moment. And some details on the buildings on the background, because right now I don't have windows there, I don't have anything, so I'm going to add some more details there. Now there are some more shadows sort of running on the boats because of all of the wires and the ropes and things like this, so I'm just getting those in there. It's important to help indicate the boat's shapes, and it gives it some more depth. As you saw on the right boat, you can see this really well. Now there's this strange wire running on the right, and some more details. Now I'm kind of improvising and going with my intuition and what I feel is right. The buildings on the background had a bit of touches of red on them, so I'm just putting that in there. There are some shadows also I want to strengthen there at the back. I'm actually really excited because I'm gonna go soon to paint on location again. Go outside here, and there's some very nice streets with beautiful old buildings, which I love. And I will have my new setup, and hopefully I'll have some interesting results to share with you. It's just so much more fun when you can actually see the reference in front of you, and I will talk more about that a lot, actually, in the near future. So now adding some details to the chimneys, just better establishing their shape by adding shadows and some more colors. A lot of them I found to be a little warm, a little red, and I kind of followed what I saw in that sense. Sometimes just following what you see can be a good thing. I think sometimes it can be the wrong decision, just because you can get so much more of an effect if you change things around. So this is something I'm working on right now. Just the flexibility of changing things around, not necessarily sticking to what I see 100%. I find that it happens more naturally when it's funny, when I'm painting while standing up. I don't know why, and also I find that it works. Maybe my energy levels are higher that way. And I also find that in the few times I really did the on-location paintings and sketches, well, not I did it a lot, especially sketches, but painting with the easel and everything, I didn't do that many times, and I can say that it definitely improves that. So yeah, just another thing to try out more and dive deeper into. I really want to try out more of that. So now I think this area of the roof lacked some shadows because you can't really separate it from the trees in the background. So I kind of decided to darken the lower part of it. I think it sort of suited the light conditions in the reference as well. So that's a good thing actually. I'm pleased with this area a lot. Also the chimney added a bit of shadow to it. Just a few touches here and there. And you can see the buildings are a bit fragmented. That's fine. There are a few white gaps in between them. I didn't plan for them necessarily, but it still ends up working in the grand scheme of things, so that's okay. Now I left some of the dormers on the very left building, and I will add some indication of them. I just left it as white, as a not white, but as the previous wash. Hopefully I'll get that in a moment. So now there's this shadow under the roof, and yeah, now I'm gonna start working on those dormers. So what I did was basically I did the first wash, then I did the second wash, if you remember. And for the second wash, I just negative painted around them, kind of leaving 3 square shapes. And now I'm adding in their shadows, which will help turn them into dormers. This is basically triangles on the right, and then some straight lines on the dormers themselves. So relatively simple actually, and just you don't need a lot more than this to indicate it. And now I have this area that's a little more shaded, and on the previous wash I kind of let it blend with the roof itself, and this time I kind of want to establish it as a separate thing. So I just added another glaze and didn't darken it too much. So now we have to work on the windows, add those in, probably using a dry brush because I don't want them to pop too much. It's funny because you kind of know when you're doing the dry brush or very weak value thing right, because everything just pops in its place. So you get this sort of sixth sense. I'm somewhat pleased with this one. On the last painting I did, which I didn't show you yet, I got this sort of a dry brush stroke into an existing wash, and it just worked perfectly. I could tell that it got in there like really perfectly. So this is something that I'm starting to develop a feel for. I think also the level of wetness is something you develop a feel for, and it's just amazing after about a year and a half in watercolor, I think, to start really get a deeper understanding of these things. As I said, it's one of the most interesting learning curves I've ever had. I'm actually curious if any of you have experience with oils and with pastels and with acrylics, just to hear a bit more about the learning curve, if you can compare it to watercolor. It's very interesting for me to hear, because I'm sure whichever field you take, you will encounter a lot of hardships and things to learn. But I do feel, as someone who did experiment with quite a lot of mediums, that watercolor has this something unique about it. Maybe the lack of control, maybe the fact that there's so many different things and different elements at play, like the wetness and the wetness of every part of the color on the paper, of the brush, of the palette. There's a lot of wetness generally, and the transparency aspect and all of that. You can't just cover things up, you can't add highlights, you can't really correct or build things up slowly. You get sort of 1 or 2 chances at it and then you're done. So I find this fascinating, and I think a part of why I enjoy this medium so much. So I'm curious to hear what are your thoughts about comparing the learning curve of watercolor to other media. It's very interesting for me, so yeah, if you can leave a comment below and let me know what you think. I'm really curious, and I think one day when I take up maybe oils for a while or something like this, I will be able to tell the difference myself, and then it could be really interesting actually. So now I'm trying to reflect those shadows that I put in there. Of course, it doesn't have to be perfect, you see it's not following them exactly, but it still gives off the feeling, I think it even gives off the feeling of sort of water reflecting sun on the boat, which I really like this effect. Now this is just a small touch, but this roof on the right felt a bit too light for me, so I decided to add a bit more color to it. And at this point, the painting is literally done. There's just a few touches I want to get in of the gel pen, and I don't even remember. Oh, I think also the water on the left should require some work just to bring out the reflections of the boats on the left. Sorry about these gaps because you can't see the palette with this video, so you don't see the mixing. Now I'm using a bit of undersea green, putting it on the sort of dock wall, and trying to get the most out of the dry brush because it did have a feeling of like mold on it, maybe because of all of the water that flies on it constantly if there's waves and things like this. So many times you'll have this sort of green weathered look. Come to think of it, I could have gotten that effect by just spritzing some water on it using my my water sprayer earlier on the wall of the dock. I'm actually a bit regretting not doing that. Or maybe just splashing water with my fingers like I do sometimes, because I think it could have added a lot of beauty to the wall itself. So now I put in just a few more details of the boats, and I'm going with the white gel pen, very rare sight on my channel, so absorb it while you can. I don't know when the white gel pen will be back, but I'm really pleased with knowing that I used it here. And you can see it just barely brings out some white. Because it's not directly on paper and it's kind of on paint. The paint is dry at this point, but still, it's just a very weak white. It's not very strong. It's not like if I would take white paint straight out of the tube. Okay, and I think this is it for the white one. Now, I did cut some of the mixings. This is why the transition was so fast from the white gel pen to paint. But anyway, now I'm better indicating the shadows under the boats, as I said I will. Shadows or reflections, really depending on the angle. In some angles you will see reflections, some angles you will see shadows. So this one felt a little more like it needs a feeling of a shadow. So I'm adding that in right now. And I will try, because it's water and it flows, I will try to blend it in with the rest of the water, just to make sure it doesn't look like it's out of place. But looking back, even now it looked okay. I could probably just blend it as it is. But now I added some clear water. Cleaning the brush, adding some more water, more paint, sorry, more French ultramarine to reflect the boat's French ultramarine. And now I just want to blend that into the existing wash by using a clear brush with just a bit of water, not too moist. So you see it kind of lets it blend into the existing wash. And now we have the shape of the boats on the left better indicated. So now I'm just signing this with my name. And this is done, basically. This is it. Very pleased with this one. Really happy with how it turned out. And you will get to see now just the picture because it represents it a little better than the video.
So let's have one closer look at the final result. I'm really pleased with the way I abstracted things here. Can I say that? I'm not sure. Abstracted, but the way I turned things into more abstract shapes, especially the buildings here in the background, all the trees here, the shadows and everything, and it's really clear that the boats are the center of attention. They really pop. Nothing really competes with them. You have these ones here. This house is a little brighter, so it pops a little more. Nice details on the chimneys, nice sort of rigging or whatever you would call that. Maybe giving this one a bit of a different color, like blue would balance it out better with this one, just the stripe on the top, but still very pleased with it. And after a long time I actually used the white gel pen just to get some final details. So overall really pleased with this, and I feel like this is a great step in the right direction of what I'm looking for. Okay, so let's change the angle and wrap this up. So friends, I hope you enjoyed seeing this full process. I think there's a lot to learn from the way I approached the abstraction and just simplifying the scene here for me as well. I will enjoy watching it again because this is currently the biggest challenge for me. When I work with pen, it's not really, and I'm just sketching, it's not really hard for me, but for some reason watercolor is a completely different story. There's so many variables to take care of. Okay, so that's for that. Now I decided that this month I will offer for sale somewhere around 3 of my paintings. Okay, so this is one of them. So if you're interested, I'm gonna drop a link in the description box below. I'm not sure exactly if it will be eBay or my own web page, but check it out if you're interested. And yeah, I'll probably do this maybe once or twice again in this month. And the original one, okay, not prints or something like this. I want to sell this original one. So if you're interested, check out the link in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give a thumbs up to this video, and follow me on Snapchat and Instagram for more personal updates and more works in progress. Okay, so again, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you again in another video tomorrow.